We're going to talk about a situation today at a business where one of the coworkers is getting promoted. They're getting a better job at a higher salary, but the other coworkers are feeling jealous about this. So this is Tom. He has been promoted to a better job. And this is Jack. Jack is not happy that Tom has been promoted. One day, Jack and a coworker named Jill are arguing about the promotion. Jack says, "It's not fair. How come Tom got the promotion instead of me? I'm just as smart as he is." Jill says, "But you must acknowledge that Tom works harder than anyone else." "Okay, fine. I acknowledge that. But I still think I should have gotten the promotion." So, does Tom work harder than anyone else? Yes, he does. Does Jack agree that Tom works harder than anyone else? Yes, he does. But is Tom working hard an idea that helps Jack's main point? Jack's main point is that he should get the promotion, not Tom. Does the fact that Tom works hard help with Jack's main point? No, it doesn't. So, Jack acknowledges that Tom works hard. He recognizes that Tom works hard. He accepts that Tom works hard, but it's not something that he wants to admit. It doesn't help his main point. So acknowledge, according to the dictionary, means to accept that something is true or exists. But it's often used in situations when the person or the thing doesn't want to accept it or has bad feelings about it. For example, Germany acknowledged its war crimes. This is a sentence using acknowledged, which is a good English sentence. It makes it clear that Germany is admitting its war crimes. Germany knows that it did its war crimes, but they're not happy about it. They acknowledge it, but it's not something that they like. Whereas Germany acknowledged its greatness is a little bit strange. We more commonly use acknowledge for bad things or things that we don't like than for good things. In this meaning, it has some near synonyms, such as confess. For example, I confessed to the police that I had been drinking. Or admit. For example, he admitted that he broke the window. These are both near synonyms to acknowledge with this meaning. However, acknowledge also has another meaning, which is something that many people know or many people recognize. So historians acknowledge him as an expert is not a bad meaning. It just means that they all recognize him. Also, acknowledge can often be used with the adverb widely or generally or usually or universally to mean something that many people know or that is common sense. For example, it is widely acknowledged that exercise is healthy. This is something that everyone knows. It can also have another meaning of something official. So France was one of the first countries to officially acknowledge the independence of the United States of America, meaning that this was an official act of their government to recognize the United States of America, and it quite often collocates with officially. The register is formal, meaning that this is something that's used primarily in writing, much more in writing than in speaking. It can be used in conversations, as we saw earlier, but these are mostly formal conversations, business or academic setting, or formal speeches. It's not usually used in casual conversation with friends or family. Pronunciation. There are 3 syllables. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. The stress is on the second syllable. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Now, the grammar. Acknowledge is a transitive verb, meaning that it must be followed by an object. So, he acknowledged the truth. We need an object after acknowledged. To return to our earlier example, Jack says, okay, fine, I acknowledge that. In order to be grammatically correct, we need the that there. Even though we can understand the meaning without it, okay, fine, I acknowledge, and we know what he's talking about from the conversation, this would sound strange to an English speaker because acknowledge must have an object or a phrase. It can be followed by an ing verb phrase. So, for example, she acknowledged having a drinking problem. It can be followed by a that phrase. He acknowledged that he might have been wrong. It can be followed by a person as an object and then an as. For example, historians acknowledge him as the best president. And this same construction can also be used in the passive. He is generally acknowledged as the best president. This is the present passive with the adverb generally here. We can also use a to be phrase after acknowledged. He is generally acknowledged to be the best president. Form. So present tense is acknowledge, I acknowledge, you acknowledge, we acknowledge, they acknowledge. The third person singular is acknowledges. Now, because it ends with a j sound, when we put on the third person singular s, it adds another syllable. So we are now at 4 syllables. Acknowledges. Acknowledges, 4 syllables. The past simple is acknowledged. It's a j sound. There's no vowel here. We just say j, d, acknowledged, acknowledged. And because it's a regular verb, the past simple and the past participle are both acknowledged. And the present participle is acknowledging. Although careful, because it's not usually in the continuous form. It's a state verb, similar to believe or know or understand. So we can say, I acknowledge your point, but we wouldn't usually say, I am acknowledging your point. This would not be good English. It's very rare to have it in the continuous form. But you might see the present participle being used, for example, as a gerund. Acknowledging the risk is important. Common collocations. It collocates with a lot of adverbs. For example, fully. I fully acknowledge what you said, meaning like 100%. Freely or readily. So I freely acknowledge this. I readily acknowledge this means I'm doing it without any hesitation, uh, clearly or explicitly. So he explicitly acknowledged his guilt, meaning there was no doubt. Effectively, or implicitly, or tacitly is often used if something is not directly said, but it's acted as if that was true. For example, the country is effectively acknowledged to be independent. Or by meeting the president, the U.S. effectively recognized the independence of that country. Meaning that the action seemed to show it, even though it wasn't directly said. It's also collocates with formally or officially. As we saw earlier, acknowledged is used for formal acts, like France formally recognized the United States as an independent country, or officially recognized the United States. Openly or publicly, for example, he openly admitted his guilt, meaning he told everyone. Or the opposite of that would be privately. So he openly acknowledged his guilt versus he privately acknowledged his guilt. He maybe just told his friends, but he didn't tell the public. And sometimes it's used with reluctantly or ruefully. So he reluctantly acknowledged that global warming is a problem, meaning he didn't want to do it. It's often used with certain verbs, fail to or refuse to. So this is quite often used for the negative. You could say he didn't acknowledge, but it's more common to say he refused to acknowledge. It is a more common collocation. So he refused to acknowledge the problem, or he failed to acknowledge the problem. Sometimes it collocates with be forced to. So he was forced to acknowledge that he had a drinking problem after the car accident, meaning that something made you acknowledge it. And then phrases. Is generally, be generally, universally, or widely. All of these are used for something that many people, or almost all people, think. It is quite often used in the passive. It is widely acknowledged that. So, for example, it is widely acknowledged that human activity is contributing to climate change. Or it can be used as the predicate, is widely acknowledged. For example, the benefits of exercising are widely acknowledged. Or exercising, the fact that it is healthy to exercise every day is widely acknowledged. Some related word forms. An adjective form would be acknowledged. This is the same form as the past simple or past participle, but it can be used as an adjective, meaning known or accepted by many people. For example, he is an acknowledged expert in history, meaning many people know it, many people accept it. Another related form is self-acknowledged. Now this means that the person themselves acknowledges it. For example, if he is a self-acknowledged bully, that means he knows himself that he has a problem with being a bully. It can also be used as a noun, acknowledgement. Now, as a noun, it has a couple of different meanings. It can mean the fact of accepting that something is true or right. This is pretty much the same meaning, but just with the grammar of the noun. So instead of he acknowledged his guilt, you can say acknowledgement of guilt is important. It can also be used, though, as a reply to an email, or to let somebody know that you got their letter or their email. So thank you for your acknowledgement of my letter means thank you for letting me know that you received my letter. Acknowledgements can also be used with an S, and when it's used with an S, it actually has a different meaning. Then it means the beginning of a book in which you thank all the people who help you with your book. So at the beginning of any book, there will be a section at the front called Acknowledgements, where you can thank everyone who helped you with the book.